you searching for fulfillment? Discover true happiness. Stay tuned to Shalom World.
Welcome to our sharing on St. John's Gospel. In this episode, I want to bring us into chapter 2 of St. John's Gospel, and I'm going to read part of it first, and then I'm going to dissect it, sometimes line by line, sometimes word by word, because people read this on a superficial level and they come to conclusions that John didn't think about. John has very deep things in mind when he's actually giving you this text. So let's read it. 3 days later, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited. When they ran out of wine, since the wine provided for the wedding was all finished, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said, "Woman, why turn to me? My hour has not yet come." And his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And there were 6 stone water jars standing there, meant for the ablutions that are customary among the Jews. That's the Judeans. Each could hold 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. "Draw some out now," he said, "and take it to the steward." They did this, and the steward tasted the water which had turned into wine, and having no idea where it came from, only the servants who drew the water knew. The steward called the bridegroom and he said, "People generally serve the best wine first, and keep the cheaper wine until the guests have had plenty to drink. But you've kept the best wine until now." This was the first of the signs that Jesus gave. It was at Cana in Galilee. He let his glory be seen, and his disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and the brothers and stayed there a few days. On the surface, that reads a very simple story. But if you look at it at all, you are tripped up by lots of individual points. And so I want to give you a very detailed response to this and let you know what treasure is there if only you will look at it from above and not look at it from below. From below, it's very easy. They didn't have enough wine, and Blessed Mother asked Jesus to supply the wine. He did. But that's not what John is saying. So, the unfolding of the mystery that we have been talking about in all the episodes up to now, and which have been given to us in chapter 1, it's now beginning to unfold in chapter 2. We get the first pulling back of the veil to see who Jesus really is. And we get the first sign that he wants to give about his mission to all the world. Galilee was called Galilee of the Gentiles. Let me read this for you from Isaiah chapter 9. In the days past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. That's the area that was called Galilee in Jesus' time. But in the days to come, he will confer glory on the way of the sea, on the far side of the Jordan, province of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. On those who live in a land of deep shadow, a light has shone. And then I'm going to jump down. Because there is a child born for us, a son given to us, and dominion is laid on his shoulders. And this is the name they give him: Wonder Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Wide is his dominion, in a peace that has no end. For the throne of David and for his royal power, which he establishes and makes secure in justice and integrity from this time onwards and forever. We're going to hear the scriptures being fulfilled all the way through. Not just all the way through the gospel, but almost on every line of the text. Okay. Galilee of the Gentiles. That's where Jesus decided to begin. And this is very, very important, because nothing that God does is extra. He does exactly what is required in each situation. So if he begins in Galilee of the Gentiles, it's because that is most significant in terms of the mission of Jesus. The people of Judea, who had Jerusalem as its capital city and the temple as the center of its public worship, these people in John's Gospel are called Judeoi, usually translated in English as Jews. But the translation gives a problem, because the term Jews was not used for these people until several centuries into the Christian era. So the translators have actually given us a problem and produced a lot of anti-Semitism, which is not necessary. In John's Gospel, these Judeoi are the people of Judea, and the people who opposed Jesus are the leaders of the Judeoi. Jesus himself is a Judean because he was born in Bethlehem. That's why you read in chapter 1 that he came to his own people and his own people rejected him. He himself was a Jew, and you're going to realize that it is his own people who actually give him more trouble than anybody else. Okay, so the Judean leadership is usually called the Sanhedrin, and it's made up of scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees and the various priestly families and the heads of all the important families of the land. And it is in the temple, in the city of Jerusalem, that they kept very, very strictly to the laws of Moses, because the Pharisees were meticulous on every detail of the law. And Jesus is going to challenge this. Because they had narrowed down the will of God into absolutely particular laws that may not express the people's love for God at all, which is really sad. But because they kept very, very strictly to the laws of Moses, and they added 613 rules for the Sabbath day alone, could you imagine? They had neither sympathy nor understanding for the people in Galilee. Why? Because it was Galilee of the Gentiles. It was the only place in the whole land where Jews and Gentiles, or shall I say the people of the land and people from other lands, could live together in harmony. And they worked and lived together side by side. But as far as the folks in Jerusalem were concerned, that meant that they were contaminated. And they were compromised with the world, so they absolutely despised them. That's why you'll hear an expression like, "Can any prophet come out of Galilee? What good could come out of Nazareth?" These people are contaminated because they live and work side by side with people from other nations. Okay. The folks in Jerusalem also hated the Samaritans. Now, they despised the Galileans, but they had a very special hatred for the Samaritans. They treated the Samaritans as heretics because they only accepted the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch or the Torah. The Samaritans didn't accept the prophets and the other writings. And so there was an expression which is going to be thrown at Jesus in chapter 8, verse 48, that you are possessed and that you are a Samaritan. And for the folks in Jerusalem, that was the same thing. Samaritan and possessed. In other words, you're worshipping the devil. It's really frightening. And so the folks in Jerusalem are against this area. And the amazing thing is that when God became man, he chose to go to Galilee and he chose to go to the Samaritans. You'll hear and see him going to the Samaritans in chapter 4. In other words, we have the proof of a text I've already given to you that God's ways and our ways are very different. God's way of thinking and our way of thinking are total opposites. And in doing this, God is telling us that he doesn't think or work like us. Not at all. He's very different to us. And the strange thing is that it is in Galilee and among the Samaritans that people will be much more open to Jesus. They will listen to him, they will receive him, and insofar as human beings can respond, they do respond to him. It's very interesting. So you have to remember as we are going through the gospel about the two levels, the level of above and the level of below. This is very important because if you read what happens at Cana of Galilee from below, it's very simple. When I show it to you from above, you'll see how utterly profound it actually is. So as we go through the text, we need to ask the Lord to raise us up to the level of above so that we have eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts that will understand. Otherwise, we're going to miss it. The very first thing we have to examine are the first three words, 3 days later. This gospel sits on the third day because Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, and the whole gospel is moving in that direction. So we have to look at the significance of the third day, and it is very significant in the scriptures, okay? If you go back to the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, the story of creation, it was on the third day that God declared twice that the development of his works was good, and he blessed them. So he began blessing them on the third day. This is very important. And it's when we come to the third day at the end of the gospel, you'll realize the enormity of the blessing that God gives to the work of redemption. Okay, so in Exodus chapter 19, we then have the covenant of Moses about to be signed on Mount Sinai. And this is what Moses said to them. And this is Exodus chapter 19 from verse 10. Go to the people and tell them to prepare themselves today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothing and hold themselves in readiness for the third day. Because on the third day, God will descend on the mountain of Sinai, and he will descend in the presence of the whole people. Now that is a prophetic forecast to the Lord showing himself on the third day in resurrection. And so they had to hold themselves in readiness for this extraordinary event that was going to happen. When you go to Genesis chapter 22, you have the story of Abraham taking his son Isaac to Mount Moriah to sacrifice Isaac in obedience to the Lord. And what happens? They arrive on the third day. Don't you think that's interesting? Because the sacrifice of Isaac is the prophetic forecast of the sacrifice of Jesus on Calvary. You're told in Jonah chapter 1 verse 17 that Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Back in Matthew's gospel, which I've already done, Jesus gave the sign of Jonah as the sign of his resurrection, that the Son of Man would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So, John wants to tell us that as we begin reading chapter 2, that we've to keep Jesus' great victory on the third day in our minds as he begins to unfold the mystery piece by piece as we go along. Of course, he will give us a final sign of the third day before that, and that will be the raising of Lazarus, which will happen on the third day. And the raising of Lazarus is an absolutely extraordinary preparation for the resurrection of Jesus himself. Deal with that later. So we're still on verse 1. And the next thing we have to look at is there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Now, for all of us, weddings are ordinary. They're happening on a daily basis. People come together, commit themselves in love, ask for God's blessing for their new life. And Cana of Galilee was only a very small village. So most of the village would have been at the wedding. But that's not actually the point. The point is that when you go back into the scriptures, the wedding is a terribly important concept, because we're told by the prophets that God the Father was the bridegroom of Israel, and that he was wedded to this people in the Mosaic covenant, and therefore that the people of Israel were his bride. This is terribly important. If you take Isaiah 54, verses 4 to 5, you will forget the shame of your youth. You will no longer remember the curse of your widowhood, for your Creator will be your husband, his name, the Lord of hosts. Isaiah 62, verse 5, like a young man marrying a virgin, so will the one who built you wed you. As the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so will your God rejoice over you. The prophets used the symbol of marriage in order to be able to get through to the people when they are failing in their covenant commitment to God. And so when they fall back into idol worship, they are accused of adultery. Some people who read the scriptures on a very low level, the wedding symbol is the great symbol of the commitment that God has for his people and the people have for their God. So when you come to Hosea chapter 2, for example, the prophet speaks about the disloyalty of the chosen people to their divine husband, and that he wants to bring them back, that is in redemption, and to get them to commit themselves to the marriage again. That means that they come back into the covenant and that they begin to live this relationship between God and themselves. So, when John tells us that there will be a wedding on the third day, he's talking about a new revelation, because when Jesus rises from the dead on the third day, his covenant that he will have made and cut in his own body on the cross for us will be accomplished. And on the third day, he will have a new bride, and that is the church. We eventually call it the church. And we're going to hear this confirmed for us in chapter 3, when we're told that the bride is only for the bridegroom. So there's a new bridegroom and a new bride actually being presented. Just as at any wedding, you have a new bride and a new bridegroom, and you have a new covenant, and you have a new commitment to a life of loving commitment to each other. So this is what John is thinking about. And the wedding at Cana of Galilee is merely the context in which John can talk to you about these deeper things. So Jesus has come to prepare a new bride for himself, and the church will be made up of Jews and Gentiles. And there will be the marriage bond of the new covenant, the everlasting covenant that Jesus will make for us. And the new covenant will be a covenant of love. The old covenant under Moses was a covenant of law and justice. And so there was laws and breaking of laws and punishments and all the rest of it. The new covenant is entirely about love and mercy, which is totally extraordinary, and given to a people, the Gentiles, who had no preparation like the Jewish people had for the covenant. So the Gentiles are thrown into this completely new relationship with God, which is totally love and mercy, which I hope we appreciate. It's absolutely amazing. The one law of the new covenant, the new marriage, is going to be love. But the English language has a problem. I suppose many problems. But the problem it has is it uses the word L-O-V-E for all kinds of things. So we have to go back to the Greek, which uses different words. The Greek uses eros for human, fleshly love, physical love. Jesus is not talking about that. Greek uses philos for the love of friendship. Jesus isn't talking about that. And the Greek uses agape for divine love, and that's what Jesus is talking about all the time. So as I go through this commentary, I'm going to say agape love, so that you know we're talking on the divine level. We're talking about the divine love that's been given to us. And this is why in the second half of the gospel, Jesus is going to say to us, I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. That is with agape love. And by this love, which is completely different to eros and philos, by this love, everybody will know that you are my disciples. This love is going to be completely different. And one of the things they said during the time of the Acts of the Apostles is these Christians, how they love one another. It's just amazing. It's not selfish. It's not egotistical. It's not what I can get out of it. This one law, this agape love, is a forgiving love. It's a self-sacrificing love. It's an all-conquering love that Jesus is going to conquer every single nation on earth with. It doesn't matter what your culture is. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter who your tribe is. It doesn't matter what your color is. This one love is the all-conquering love. And eventually the human race will actually surrender. We resist as much as we like because we're so selfish and we're so caught up in this lower level. And so in order to introduce us to this agape love, we were told in chapter 1 that Jesus has come to us as incarnate love. He literally embodies this love. And so he is the model. And we watch him and we watch how he operates and we listen to what he says, because that is the model. So we look at Jesus and we find the most important thing for him is to do the Father's will. So we will realize as the bride of this bridegroom that the most important thing for us as the church is to do God's will. The second thing is that you love one another. And if this love doesn't exist between us, then the sign of his covenant is actually not there. But we have to love on the realm of above. That's what conquers. Selfish, egotistical love doesn't get anywhere. The next thing we need to look at in this is the young couple who are getting married at Cana of Galilee. You're told nothing about them. You're not told their names. You're not told anything. They're just there. So if people are not actually named and called out, as we would say, then you've got to say, what is John saying? The answer is, he's saying a lot. The couple are not named because John wants you to read this text not on the natural level that Jim and Joan are getting married, because that's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about that at all. The couple represent all the people in the new covenant who will be committed to each other by this command of Jesus and by this covenant of Jesus. And they will be committed together in love. And the new marriage that Jesus is going to bring for us in the new covenant is going to be a marriage made in heaven. It's going to be a love marriage. And this is the way Jesus described it. John 15:9. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. So you must love one another. There you have the whole thing. The Father has loved the Son infinitely, absolutely, eternally, unconditionally, knowing him absolutely. And Jesus has loved us infinitely, absolutely, unconditionally, with absolute forgiveness, knowing us for who we are. And he says that this agape love is what we have to give to other people, knowing them for who they are, knowing their faults, their failings, their shortcomings, everything. That we have this all-conquering love. It's totally incredible. It's a marriage made in heaven. And so this marriage at Cana of Galilee represents this marriage made in heaven. And in our next episode, I want to take it up from there. Thank you for listening. Slán agus Banach Day live. Goodbye. God bless you.
We live in a media age, of course, an age in which we get almost all of our information either from television or from the internet. Probably less and less of our information is coming through the traditional print media. So in that context, in today's world, an undertaking like Shalom World is incredibly important. And the efforts to catechize and to evangelize through television and through the internet is incredibly important in the world today. And I'm happy to say that my experience of Shalom has been entirely positive, and I am very happy to encourage everyone who's working as part of Shalom World in their efforts to bring the Catholic faith to the world around us. And also I give my special blessing on all those who are involved in Shalom, all those who are watching Shalom, and all the future viewers of Shalom. So thank you, and God bless you.